Let's imagine that Google Maps wants to launch in South Korea and you're choosing between several local vendors, and each one has a different map data set. Tell me which one you would choose. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Exponent Product Management mock interview. My name's Kevin, and on today's show we have Hao. We're going to be doing a product management, analytical, or strategy type question. But before we jump into that, Hao, can you just tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Hey everyone, so I'm Hao. I'm currently an engineering manager in a startup called Cressicore. But before that, I was a PM and APM at Google for 5 years, working on the Google Assistant.
Sweet, thanks for your time today. So this is what I'd like to ask you. Let's imagine that Google Maps wants to launch in South Korea and you're choosing between several local vendors, and each one has a different map data set. Tell me which one you would choose.
Okay, so Google Maps wants to expand basically in a new country, and I'm choosing between different vendors for maps data.
Yes.
Okay, and then how do I decide basically? Okay, so maybe just to clarify, but so when we say maps data, I assume that's kind of like the data that I would see in the Google Maps app. And so like when I open Google Maps in South Korea, like whatever I see there with the streets and the businesses, that's what we're referring to here, right?
Yeah, we can start with this assumption, and then if we have time, we can expand upon this definition.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. And is this specifically like you mentioned South Korea? Is there a specific reason why Google Maps is not in South Korea yet, or like why are we expanding into South Korea now?
Yeah, this is just a strategic decision, and you're the PM, so now we want a good data set to be chosen for the team.
Okay, cool. Do you mind if I just take like 10 seconds just to like kind of structure my thought a little bit here?
No, feel free.
Okay, so I would say, I think off the bat, I think I'm definitely seeing at least kind of like three different factors that we should consider here. The first one being kind of like just data quality, in the sense of like how good is the data, meaning like how accurate is the data. Are we missing anything that, like when we talk about businesses and streets, for instance, like how closely does that map to reality, basically, right? Then we have kind of like I was calling the business side of things, right? So like how much are we paying for that? What does the kind of like contract look like, right? Is this kind of like are we committing for like 50 years? Is this a yearly renewal thing? These kind of things. And then finally, kind of like a non-functional aspects of kind of like how would the integration look like? What about licensing? Can we expect kind of like ongoing updates, or is this kind of just like we buy the data one time and then we have to keep maintaining it? So I think these are all kind of factors to consider. But given that we are Google in this scenario, especially Google Maps, I think I'm gonna make a bit of an assumption here, but I would imagine that like being Google, like for instance, the cost doesn't really matter, right? Like Google typically really cares about like just providing the best experience to their users, and I can't imagine that they are gonna be very price sensitive about which vendor to pick. I think they always go with whoever provides the best data, leading to the best user experience here. Similarly, in this kind of like non-functional thing, like when we talk about, okay, how easy is it to integrate? Given that Google is operating at such a big scale, like I think even if there was a vendor that like, maybe provides the data in a slightly different format than what the rest of Google Maps does today, I don't think that would also be a huge kind of factor, because Google can probably just lift that thing and kind of okay, like convert it into whatever format they need it in, and kind of like provide it in a reliable way. One thing I didn't mention here for non-functional, also reliability, right? Like how like if we are licensing this maps data and using it directly from the vendor, how reliable is it in terms of uptime, etc. But I think all these things, Google could just basically provide that for the vendor instead, right? Like Google Maps is pretty reliable, so I think they could just switch all these infrastructure, like all these factors regarding infrastructure, they could just switch it over to Google infrastructure, So I think really the most important factor here would be data quality. So I think in terms of like, choosing which vendor we are going with, I think data quality should be the single biggest driver in terms of like, the value in that data, because like I said, all the other factors, I think Google can fairly easily or fairly straightforward solve these problems. Do you think that?
In terms of big pillars that you're looking at, is this like some unordered list that you just came up with, or is this a ranked list?
Yeah, I mean, it started as an unordered list. I think if we were to rank it by kind of like importance and priorities, like I said, I think data quality should be the biggest deciding factor, because that's gonna be the main driver for like what the user experience in the end will be. And then I think the next one would be this non-functional aspects. But again, I think if that was something that a particular vendor was very bad at, I think Google could totally, with their infrastructure, just basically compromise on that. So like
Yeah,
in an extreme, yeah.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that there's the cost there. So for the sake of time, let's just dive deeper into the data quality here. So can you tell me more about what you would look for in the data quality?
Yeah. So I think what we should start with here is kind of like just get crisp on like what the data is actually going to be used for, and like what the user is expecting as well. And I think then we can talk about, okay, what kind of metrics and what kind of characteristics about the data we would be looking for, if that makes sense to you. So here, I think the one key question to figure out whether the data quality is good or not is kind of like to think about like what is this data used for, right? So we kind of talked about it's kind of like in Google Maps, and as an kind of like assumption here, I'm just going to say I think Google Maps kind of like has two major use cases, maybe three, like a third one being smaller. So the first one I see is definitely kind of like the typical I need to go from A to B, I need to look up directions, whether that's driving or that's like transit or like walking directions. I just want to know how I get from A to B, right? So here I would just call that directions. And then I think the second one is kind of like I'm looking for places, for like businesses, like I want to look up a restaurant in my area, and like I'm kind of looking for a list of all the places that are around me. So here I would say looking up businesses, places, or just like POIs basically. Right? And when I say looking up businesses, probably also like information about them, right? So like I'm interested in their opening hours, I'm interested in their phone number, maybe if I want to call them, etc. And then the third one I was thinking about, I would assume it's not a huge one, but it's something along the lines of like more like fun things. Like, I think especially on Google Maps, people like to like, oh, this is my house and this is my home address, and they wanna see that on Google Maps. But I would say that's maybe more something for like Street View and satellite imaging, which Google would have already or do on their own in a different way. So I think it makes sense for us to focus on these two use cases, if you agree.
Yeah, for sure. Feel free to dive deeper into these if you can.
Sure. Yeah. So let's start maybe with kind of like the businesses part. So I think here, when we talk about data quality, if I'm looking at businesses, if I'm searching for businesses, I would say there are a few things that are important for this, right? So I think off the bat, I would say you definitely have something along the lines of like precision and recall for the data, right? So like if I am looking for a business, so imagine I'm in South Korea, I'm searching for restaurants in my area. Precision in that case would be, the results that we are giving you, the places that we give you based on the vendor's maps data, are they actually restaurants, right? Like are we giving you the correct answer? So do we find or do we return the right places? But then also recall here is kind of like more like a coverage thing, right? Like how often are we able to actually give you restaurants? Right. So I think here straight away we kind of like already have two metrics that we probably would want to measure for all these different vendors and compare against that we want to maximize. So how often do we return places or like results? let me think if there's other use cases, but I think, or like other high level things. I mean, I think coverage in general is probably something that we should consider here as well. So, I mean, just to take a step back, I think on a high level, what we want to do is basically some sort of measurement between how closely is this maps data from this vendor, like how closely is that reflecting the reality, right? Like kind of like the ground truth, basically. And then that's kind of what we want to compare against. So I think what I'm trying to think about now is really what is the best way to kind of like measure that difference between this is the maps data and this is the reality, right? So here I already mentioned like something like precision, something like recall, are kind of like helpful kind of starting points. I think let's just start with these maybe. So if I wanted to figure out, you know, how well is, how precise is my data in the sense that like, you know, all the places that I have that I'm getting from a vendor, are these correct, right? So are these in the right location? Are the opening hours correct? You know, is the category of the place correct? Like, am I labeling a restaurant as a bar and vice versa, things like these. How could I measure this? Or like, how could I find out what the difference here is? So I think what we could definitely do is something where we could kind of like just try to basically almost run an A/B test, right? So like what I would imagine is kind of like you could, I mean, that on the implementation side, it's maybe a lot of overhead, but like just conceptually, what we could do is like we take two different you know, data sets from different vendors, and then you know, just give a small percentage of users one set of data, and another population, another user population, another set of data, when we can compare metrics. So I would say here we can basically do like an A/B test using different data sets. Before I dive further into that, I think another higher level approach could also be something like more eval based, or like human raters based. So what I'm imagining here, it could be something like, can we just kind of like, can we just get some golden data where we know for whatever reason that this is reality, right? And then we can kind of see, okay, like what does that data set say about this place, right? So here what I'm imagining almost is kind of like, maybe we could have operators or like human evals just like gather some golden data. So you could basically go out there and say, hey, like this business is here, that's its name, these are the opening hours, and just kind of manually you know, collect that golden data. It's not very scalable, but we just need a bit kind of like statistically significant a sample size basically. And then we could go into the data set and then say, what does the data set say to tell us about this particular place, right? Does it even exist? And then is the data matching what we collected?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for flagging that approach. But yeah, let's continue with the A/B test here.
Okay, yeah. So let's say we run an A/B test, right? So I think here the questions are really kind of like, what are the metrics that we would want to like kind of monitor, right? So I think basically here the way I imagine this A/B test is kind of like users would you know, go to Google Maps, do their thing, and then we show them that data set. And like I said in the beginning, the typical things that people would do is kind of looking at businesses, right? So here I think like it's pretty much like a search quality problem, right? So like I am looking for restaurants in my area, I'm getting a set of results for that, and now we just need to figure out how relevant were these results, right? And I think one way to do that is certainly looking at interaction metrics. So how often are people, you know, interacting with the results that we are giving them? How often are they kind of like abandoning that search and maybe try something new, like issuing another search, or like maybe doing like a refinement to their query? I feel like these are all indicators that like the results that we gave to them were not really relevant or not really helpful, right? So I think off the bat, these are definitely things that I would measure here. So like interaction rates, as well as like abandonments and kind of refinements, etc.
So how would you understand if a user really got value from their interaction?
That's a really good question. So I think I mean, if you think about it, what the user really wants is they want to find relevant places that because it's also in the real world that they would want to visit as well, right? So I think here, like I'm not sure what Google Maps kind of like success metric is exactly, but I could imagine that we would want something like, did you actually go to that place afterwards, for instance, right? Like you could imagine that might be something like a real conversion, basically, right? So like it's one thing to like actually open a result and maybe look at it and potentially like interacting with it. But then ultimately, I think people use Google Maps because they want to find places in the real world that they go to, right? So it could definitely be a measurement of like, how often do you actually go to the place that we showed you here, right? And then a proxy to that could be like in Google Maps, how often do you kind of ask for directions there? How often do you call that place? How often do you like basically interact with it or engage with that place? So you can probably also like save places, right? As you can put a star on them. So I think these kind of engagements could also be a proxy towards that. But I think ultimately, like I said, maybe we can really figure out, okay, if you search for a place, how often do you actually end up going to that place afterwards?
Yeah, that makes sense. How often you go there, or how often you take a screenshot, how often you share the link.
Something
exactly like that.
Yeah,
so let's talk quickly about trade-offs here. So let's say that as you're evaluating these different metrics, one set gives you really good precision, but then another set gives you really good recall. So how would you choose the trade-off here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think at the end of the day, I think it comes down to kind of like what is Google Maps ultimate goal or like success, like North Star metric, basically. I think there will be definitely trade-offs, especially like the precision versus recall trade-off is the very typical one. I think what we didn't talk about much is kind of like also things like, big cities versus rural, right? Like you might have data sets where like it's really great in the big cities, but it's terrible in kind of rural areas. So in terms of like how I would make the trade-off here, I think really at the end of the day, I would imagine like, Google Maps has a North Star metric that we're trying to optimize, and like we would probably have to make a call there and saying, okay, like this is closer to the ultimate goal of Google Maps and the success metric, like the North Star metric of Google Maps. That being said, I wonder if there's something where we can almost make a compromise of like, can we kind of merge the multiple sets together, or can we actually start with one vendor or like one data set, and then kind of like add things that will kind of fill the gaps almost, right? So I think on Google Maps, it's very typical that like, for instance, users can actually report problems, right? So like opening hours, for instance, like I can go to Google Maps and tell, hey, like these opening hours are wrong. So potentially, if we can identify those gaps, we can actually complement like this data set that we get from the vendor with like more initiatives in this kind of like user generated content space, or any other ways how we could fill those gaps. But I think just even knowing where the gaps are in the data set that we bought or that we decided with, I think that's going to be super valuable.
Makes sense. Yeah, figuring out what sort of data is hard for user to generate, what sort of data is easy for user to generate, picking the set that is hard for user to generate, and then allowing users to generate the data
exactly.
such as opening, closing times. Yeah, great. Yeah, some sort of research study that would be helpful. Cool. Thanks, Hao, for your time. I think this wraps up our interview for today. And I have some feedback here that I'll share real quick, and I'd also love for you to tell me how you might answer the question differently if you got the question again.
Yeah, that's I think in hindsight it's always easier, right? So I think definitely what I noticed as I was going through it, sometimes I was just kind of like jumping ahead a little bit, like this precision recall thing. It's just like I think it's something that you are trained of and like you want to just say it, right? But then it wasn't really the right time to say it. I feel like it would have been more structured if I really started with this kind of like, okay, on a high level, what do we want to figure out, right? Like what we really want to figure out is the difference of reality to that data set. So in this abstract way, really like even just to have communicated that this is how I think about it would have been helpful. As well as like, I think in the end, we kind of ran more towards, okay, actually it would be good to know what the North Star metric or like what the goal of Google Maps is, what their kind of mission is, right? So I think that might have been also helpful to spend some time in the beginning. I feel like I kind of touched on that a little bit in the beginning, where I said, okay, like, let's think about what this data is going to be used for. And I think in that part might have been useful to say, what is the goal of Google Maps? What is the vision? And then also being able to later tie that back to what I said earlier, right? So I think now in hindsight, I feel like it was not very like there was not really a kind of like way to wrap it up, right? Like it didn't close the circle of like, hey, like in the beginning I talked about this, and that's why I'm making this decision here. Because remember, in the beginning, I said, this is the goal, this is the vision. I feel like that was definitely missing.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely refining the mission and the goal in the beginning would help. But overall, this was in my opinion, a great mock interview because I was able to at least get the signals that you'd be a good person to work with if you were on my team. And just zooming out and thinking about your approach to this, I really liked how you were really use case driven when you were diving into the data quality, about looking at what you would look for in data quality. And the structure you had was kind of like breadth and then depth. So you had this breadth of outlining things that you would consider, and then you did a really good job diving deep and drilling down into certain parts of the data quality factor that you wanted to investigate. So overall, really enjoyed this mock interview with you, Hao. Thanks for your time. And for the viewers, I hope you got some value from this video, and good luck with your upcoming PM interview.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons below to let us know that this video is valuable for you. And of course, check out hundreds more videos just like this at tryexponent.com. Thanks for watching and good luck on your upcoming interview.